everyone. It's deja vu all over again as we welcome back Karl Fisch, a retired Colorado teacher who first wrote a book on the Colorado pension plan, PARA, and has since collaborated with other educators to write books about other state retirement plans. Today, we interview Karl and Matt Townsley, a former Iowa teacher and administrator and current educational leadership professor at the University of Northern Iowa, about their new book on the Iowa retirement system. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello,
Thanks for
hello.
having us.
Great to have you here. Karl, I have a feeling we're going to do 48 more of these. I feel like you're rolling. We've got the list of all the in progress and completed states. We'll read that in a moment. But Karl, this is like, you created a juggernaut.
This is going to tank your podcast ratings, so you know, if you keep doing this.
I think you might be on track, or you might have this appearance might make you the most often interviewed guest in Teach and Retire Rich history.
Do I get a badge or a T-shirt or something?
Have we interviewed anybody more than 3 times?
I don't believe so, but to Karl's question, I know Saturday Night Live, they gave, I think, jackets, right?
Yes.
I think Steve Martin was a recipient, and I think, Scott, we'll have to think of something for Karl here. I love it. Well, Karl, in all seriousness, we follow you on Twitter. I love all your commentary on so many topics. And again, we just love that you're doing this because your books are easy to read. They give you the information you need. And again, if you are a teacher in these various states where Karl and his team of collaborators have written books, it's just one of the smartest things you can do. So, all right, I would love to learn a little bit more about you, Matt. You were a former teacher, an administrator, and then you became a professor, still working with, it sounds like, would-be teachers, potentially. Could you walk us through your educational career?
Yeah, Dan, I grew up in Iowa playing board games like, Payday, Monopoly, the stock market games, stuff like that. Went to college and raised a family here in Iowa. I was a high school math teacher. I'll never forget when I just was filling out the paperwork to start as a high school math teacher in Solon, Iowa. The HR person is like, all right, now, you get this amount of money for healthcare benefits, and whatever's left, you have to contribute to a 403B. Like, that was the rules in our district at the time. And I was like, I don't know anything about this. So I remember sitting at home with my mom. I was, just make a long story short, lived with my parents for a little bit after I got my first job there. And she's like, I don't know. And then it hit me. All those days growing up playing those board games, I remember sitting at my grandpa's house one time. My grandpa's now a retired farmer. He's like, Matt, all you need to know is Vanguard, S&P 500 index. That's all you need to know in life about. I was like, okay. And so I was like, okay, can I do Vanguard? Like, yeah, you can do Vanguard. This is before the 403B laws kind of did their thing. And so I put my limited amount of extra, health insurance benefit money back in the day in S&P 500 Vanguard. And that's my first exposure to the 403B world. Make a long story short, I've been a member of the Iowa Public Employee Retirement System now for close to 20 years as a high school math teacher, district office administrator, and now a educational leadership professor here at the University of Northern Iowa, public comprehensive university. And I teach primarily future school leaders every once in a while, future teachers as well. And just self-taught, a lot like Karl, just learned a lot along the way. I'm not necessarily someone that would have saw myself as some personal finance expert, but yeah, that's just kind of the way it plays out, right? You just get excited. That's what I did about IPERS and 403Bs and all that stuff. And it was fun to write the book with Karl, that's for sure.
Well, I got to jump in on something here. Tell me more about your grandfather, because Scott, we've spent 20 years doing this. We've written books, and I kind of feel like his grandfather has done it better than us, just in simpler than us. It's like a 2-word recommendation. Yeah. Talk about your grandfather. Do you know how he heard about Vanguard? What brought him to this?
I don't know. My grandpa has an 8th grade education, farmer, grew up, as a farmer's kid, I believe, and then farmed, and then, did a lot of smart things. Was a snowbird in Florida, and now they live in Florida, and just worked hard and I think had a name for every single penny that he earned. My dad would probably tell you, wish you had a different name for some of those pennies that he earned, but real good with his money. And to the point where I think he just felt like things had to be simple for him, because he read and understood things in kind of a simple way, but felt like he could apply very simple principles. And I think there's a reason that he had the stock market game at his house, so that when the grandkids would come over and play, I mean, the inside of the little cardboard box thing was where we'd write down like how much we made at the end. It was kind of like this ongoing thing. Like when you go back to grandpa's house, can you try to top whoever had the record at the time? And it was just fun. I just learned some simple things about personal finance from my grandpa. And then of course, my mom and dad tried to supplement, I guess is the best way to say it. But S&P 500 index, that was the advice.
Oh, I love it. Scott, I think in this world we make things, and especially in the financial world, overly complicated. And when you boil it down to simple ideas, I think maybe more people participate. So, that's a great story. And then I will say, if you are working with would-be teachers, I really hope you're exposing them to the 403B. I have a feeling you are, but that's one of our missions, is to get this information to teachers before they get in the classroom and before the sales sharks get them.
Yeah, Dan, just a quick story, just to reiterate how important your point is. One of my roles as a former district office administrator is I worked with the new teachers, the brand new teachers, right? So I wasn't there when they were sitting down filling out the HR paperwork, but as part of our new teacher like orientation program, we'd have like some luncheons and stuff. And you can imagine it was sponsored by this group or that group. And we'd have an open invitation for the neighborhood, financial people to come in, and they could do their spiel. And ultimately, it's just whoever kind of showed up that day and handed out probably the best goodie bags. I don't say that like in a condescending way. It's just the way it typically plays out. There wasn't really a talk or an understanding of, administrative fees and things like that, which, Karl and I talk about, and Karl's done such a fantastic job. And you all have done such a fantastic job of helping educate educators in that way. And so I think that was part of our intent in writing this book as well, is to try to build upon many of the ideas that you recommended. And we can talk more about this, Retirement Investors Club of Iowa and how that kind of plays itself out in the Iowa public employee retirement world.
Thanks so much. Just love hearing your educational journey. And again, thank you for the kind words, but it takes people like you and Karl and others from all over the country to really make a difference. So we're just glad we can play a small role.
Yeah, I love your story, Matt. It's very interesting. But I want to take just a step back for our longtime listeners. They know what we're doing here. Karl's been on a couple times, but if this is your first podcast listening to us, you might not quite know what's going on here. So I'll just give it very brief, and then we'll get into it. But I don't know how long ago it was. We'll put it in the show notes. But Karl wrote this book. And it was specific for the state of Colorado. And it basically talked about the Colorado pension system and then the Colorado defined contribution programs as well. Colorado has a great 401k that actually is available to teachers, there's only a few states that do that. Here Dan's talking about simplifying things, and we're adding 401k to the mix. Oh my God. And on one of our podcasts, we were interviewing Karl about the book, and we said, you should do this for every state. And of course, that's quite a project. So what ended up happening is Karl has been partnering with individuals in different states and essentially taking his core of the book and then adding in the individual states' information. And partnering with a local author. So we're on track. I say Karl is on track to try to get one of these books for every single state in the United States and partner with a local author, local educator. And Matt is one of the firsts to do it. We've already had on, Illinois.
Eric.
We had Eric from Illinois.
Yeah.
So Matt is actually our the third book, but the second on the podcast. So we were super excited to have you on. And Karl, can you describe what's in the book and who this is aimed at?
Sure. Excuse me. Sure. I'd say the book is a short, fairly concise introduction to financial literacy in general, and then specifically takes a deeper look at the benefits that educators get from IPERS, which, as Matt mentioned, is the Iowa Public Employees Retirement System. And so it's primarily written for folks who don't know a lot about finances, although I think it's good for lots of different folks, but primarily written for folks who maybe are intimidated by finances or feel like they're too complicated, or maybe these ideas only apply to really wealthy people. But we kind of feel like the basics of financial literacy aren't that complicated. I wrote this down, that simple principles, either Matt or Scott, I think, said that earlier, that it really is, in some respects, pretty simple. There are relatively few, easy to understand, simple decisions that people can make, can make a huge difference in their financial lives. And then that makes a huge difference in the rest of their lives. And a phrase we use in the book is it allows them to live the good life. And it's however they define what that good life is for them. And when you combine those relatively easy ideas with understanding their benefits from IPERS, and then really leveraging those benefits as they make other financial decisions, it can really have a huge impact. And again, try to do in a pretty short TLDR type book. So it's very accessible. As I think Dan mentioned, try to write in plain language. Takes an hour or two maybe to read, so it's not a big time commitment. Trying to target those folks who maybe so far haven't felt confident looking into the stuff.
Well, I was about to ask you, what you hope readers will get from it, but you kind of just answered that. It's what I love is, like you just said, you could probably read this book in a couple hours. Like, books are a commitment. When people hear book, they're, maybe they don't think Harry Potter, which is a huge commitment, but they're generally thinking 6-7 hours. Like I don't read very many books that are under 8 hours. So I love the idea that you can jump right into this, and in an afternoon, or just maybe over a couple weeks of 20-minute sessions, you're going to have a whole bunch of information presented in a very easy format. Was that your goal?
Yeah, I sort of jokingly say it's not really a book; it's just a series of short blog posts that I put together, and hopefully in an order that makes sense. So yeah, as you said, I really do think people can sit down in an afternoon on the weekend and read it and get a lot out of it, but they can take it bit by bit. And like you said, 20 minutes at a time, or even less than that. So yeah, I think, as we've said before, personal finance is personal. So I think that each person that reads it will probably take something different away. My goals, like I said, are some easy, concrete steps they can take right now that'll improve their lives. And then that they'll help them make more of a coherent plan. I think a lot of people, don't necessarily just live paycheck to paycheck, but they don't plan really far ahead, or the planning they do is general. And that if they have a more coherent plan that they can put together, particularly in conjunction with their IPERS benefits, so much of the financial advice that is out there on the web and in books don't address pensions that much, because not that many people have pensions. And that really does change how you make some of your other decisions, particularly around IRAs, 403Bs, 457s, HSA investments, those kind of things. And then just generally give people a little bit more confidence about making those financial decisions, and hopefully learning a little bit more after they spend those 1 or 2 hours, because there is more they can learn that'll make them more well-rounded. Although we think this is a really good start, and if this is all they do, that it'll improve their lives.
I think it's so important that these type of books are not intimidating. Otherwise, they're not going to be read. And I just think, Karl, I think you've got a winning formula. I really do. Matt, can you give us a brief overview of the Iowa pension plan? Because we know that every state's plan is a little bit different, and even within the state, there are different plans. Give us sort of an overview of the Iowa State Teachers Retirement Plan.
Yeah, so IPERS has been around since 1953, defined benefit plan, like so many other states are. Iowa public employees still do contribute to Social Security. I know that's different compared to Colorado, for example. There's two kind of membership categories. We focus a lot on the regular service members. That's where the educators kind of come into play. That's separate from the special service like police officers type of thing. Iowa, it's a very well respected. Educators think very highly of it. Numbers wise, it's nearly 84% funded, which is a good number for an Iowa, for a public employee pension system. That number continues to grow. About $2 billion is paid out every year to Iowans from IPERS, which is just a great way to show that that this is a great thing for Iowa, I guess is the best way to say it. The employee kicks in 6% and the employer kicks in about 9%. That's the current contribution rates. And I think for most Iowa public employees, it's just something that happens on their pay stub and, whatever type of thing. And that's maybe a good and a bad thing, right? It takes 7 years to get vested at the end, towards retirement. There's different formulas. The one that Iowa public employees most think about or know about is the rule of 88. That's the number of years that you have worked or contributed and how old you are. So for me, I'm looking forward to the year I'm 55 years old and have 33 years in, because that's when I'm going to hit the rule of 88. I can start thinking about these things. And we talk about the different rules and formulas and things like that in the book. In general, there's multiple payout options, but most educators, if they're familiar with IPERS, think about this idea. When I get to like the rule of 88, I'll have about 33 years in. For the first 30 years, there's the 2% kind of multiplier that plays into it. And then for years 31 to 35, there's a 1% multiplier in it. So in general, Iowa public employees kind of say, okay, when I'm rule of 88 or so, I'm going to get about 60% of my average 5 years highest average salary. It's kind of how they think about it. That's the general like working knowledge of it. And again, we talk about the specifics in the book. But it's a well-run system. I mean, they pivoted nicely during COVID and kind of did the whole virtual thing. As a former, Iowa educator, there was always like something in the teachers' lounge and the staff lounge. We got emails like when IPERS was coming to our district or to our area, and people never really had a bad thing to say about IPERS. It was just one of those good things that educators maybe to a certain extent took for granted. But it's a good thing, well managed. I don't know all the numbers of what their returns are and things like that, but I don't think the typical Iowa educator matters. It's just a good thing that I'm going to get about 60% of my highest average salary when I retire at the rule of 88 is how people think about it.
Oh, I love this description. And I think this validates your idea, Karl, that you can find, when you find experts, local experts, boy, it just brings so much value. One of my hopes with the book is, what your two goals are, but also, I hope that Iowans begin to appreciate more, if they're not already, what they have, because it's easy to maybe be dismissive of certain state-run things. So that is so encouraging. Matt, I hit age 55. So, I love that age. I just loved 5 and 5. I'm 56. I don't like that as much as 55, but I know for you, that's going to be a great number because of that rule of 88. And I also love how you said, people have a general idea if they work and hit 88, that number, that they're going to get about 60% of their salary through this pension system. Obviously, we really want people to save as much as possible. It's so great to hear that Iowa teachers also contribute to Social Security, but what is the lay of the land of the 403B and the 457B? Is it as sensible as the state retirement plan? I have a feeling it's not, but I'm just wondering if Iowa does the 403B and 457B any better.
So when I started, like I mentioned, the 403B laws, you guys know this better than me, were not set in stone like they are today. So it was just pick your vendor and figure out how to get the business office in your district to kind of connect with them. And so when the time came, I couldn't contribute to Vanguard anymore because the state of Iowa came up with this thing called the Retirement Investors Club of Iowa. So the lay of the land in Iowa is there's a lot of small school districts in Iowa that have kind of like a 1 or 2 person business office. And so they don't necessarily have the time, the capacity to connect with every single 403B vendor out there. So the idea was that the state was going to kind of create a system and do a certain extent of like RFPs and negotiations. So in Iowa, we have AIG, Horace Mann, Empower as some of the more typical options that are out there. They all have their different fees. But in general, as we articulate in the book, it's going to take Iowa educators really identifying the specific funds within those vendors to identify and make the most of their contributions. In my former school district, in general, it's like I mentioned in my little story earlier, it's just kind of whoever showed up at the luncheon, whoever's downtown that I can maybe go talk to rather than having to email or something along those lines that educators tend to work towards. Karl, you can maybe jump in here. I don't think there's necessarily like one that stands out that we would say, hey, everybody needs to jump on board with that one, just because it was more of a, you got to know the specific funds within those. Is that accurate, Karl?
Yeah, I think what I'd say first I mentioned is that not every Iowa district offers access to the Retirement Investors Club. It's available to every district, but not every district participates. And so some folks don't have access to that. And then even some of the districts that do participate also have other local, could have also other local vendors. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That could be a good thing. But again, it's the thing where educators really need to know enough to pick the right ones. In terms of what the Retirement Investor Club offers, and again, as Matt said, not that we're plugging the book too much here, but that we do detail it in the book. There are about 8 or maybe 9 vendors in the RIC, the Retirement Investment Club, and we recommend only 4 of them. The other ones offer annuities that are higher priced and higher fees and are more typical of the 403B landscape and the bad part of the 403B landscape. But the ones we narrow in on have much lower administrative fees, and then they offer some good index fund choices with low expense ratios. So when you combine those, you're typically in the 0.2 to 0.3 range of total expenses, which is not too bad. And then there's one that I think it's Voya, where they have no administrative fee, but most of the funds they offer have way too high of expense ratios. But they do offer one Vanguard, and I can't remember if it's total stock market or S&P 500 fund for 0.03%. And so that's a fantastic option if you don't mind going all equity to choose that one, because there's that's the total fees, 0.03. And so if you don't want to go all equity, we recommend you do your equity portion there, and then you can use one of the other ones for some of the other funds where the expense ratios aren't quite so high.
Yeah, I'm looking at these, and generally these are some vendors that we would generally tell people to stay away from. But state of Iowa has forced them to compete. Yes. This is what happens when you force vendors to compete. People think that if you have 10, 15, 20 vendors, that's competition. That's not competition. Nope, it's not competition. When you force them to compete, this is what happens. You get very good pricing, and so you've got this AIG plan with a 0.18% admin fee, and you can get a Vanguard target date fund, or Vanguard. You can build a diversified portfolio for probably less than 0.5% overall, which definitely. For 403B world is almost like gold. I mean, we talk about, like, if we can go directly to Vanguard and get a target date fund for 0.09%, and we brag about that because it's awesome. But in 403B land, if you can get 0.5% or under, oh my gosh, that's actually just fantastic. And here you have 4 different plans or 4 different products from 4 companies that we would never recommend generally.
Yes.
And you can't go too wrong. They're even if you pick the very worst one, you don't have surrender fees. Your overall fees are probably going to be 0.5% or less. You have access to a brokerage account if you want something that's not in the plan there. So this is what happens when you force people to compete. I guess this is sort of the 403B primary for Iowa. They get to pick our president. And they get to pick. Yes. They get to pick your products too.
All the vendors have to go to Iowa first.
There you go.
There's one thing I think that's helpful that the Iowa Retirement Investors Club offers, as I understand it. Let's say that someone's listening to this podcast, right? They read our book and they're like, man, I don't think I made a good choice. Because all of these fall under the Iowa Retirement Investors Club, there is, I understand, a form that makes it easy to say, you know what, I'm going to transfer from this one over to this one. And I think that's a helpful thing for Iowa educators to know is there's a process in place to transfer from one RIC provider to the other. Not always that easy, right? Like sometimes we see in our little social media groups that people are like, how do I fill out this paperwork? And it's there for you. You can call somebody at RIC that will help you out with it. That's not trying to plug a certain thing. And I've only called a couple different times for some different things, and they've been helpful, which is a good thing.
Is the 457, is there a 457 version of this, or is it only 403B? Because I know there is a state-based 457, but I don't believe it's offered to educators.
It's state of Iowa employees. Like if you are, like you work for the state government, and then there are certain other entities, like some schools have opted in. I'm kind of, shouldn't say this right now, but there's some universities in Iowa that offer a 457, and mine is not one of them. But there are some universities that offer a 457 and some school districts that do, and and there's a few I've seen that do run through RIC.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, there probably are a few districts that on their own or have contracted with a vendor for a 457, but RIC doesn't have a 457. And unfortunately, educators don't have access to the state 457. So that'd be a nice change if that could be put into legislation here.
Yeah, there's always something to work for, and that. But at least, generally we're like, okay, we need to get this 457 in here because the 403B is so bad. But at least we're not at that situation here. They have a really good option. And for our listeners, we actually interviewed the people who run RIC, Retirement Investors Club, like, I don't know, man. What do you think, Dave? It was like 6-7 years ago. So it's probably turnover. There's probably not the same people running it, but we do actually have a podcast where we interviewed the people who run RIC. So thank you for filling us in on the Retirement Investors Club. It's just so interesting when you force vendors to compete. You actually get way better pricing. So Karl, how is this project different, and I guess similar, to your other state pension books?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of similarities in the basic idea between pensions, but each pension is very unique, and that's one of the purposes of these books is that you can't just talk about pensions in general. You need to know the specifics of your pension, and I think one of the major things that's different about this one, as Matt mentioned, is that the two books prior to this, Colorado and Illinois, are both Social Security replacement systems, whereas IPERS is a Social Security supplemental system, so they pay into both. That really changes the equation. And as Matt mentioned, there's the rule of 88, and a lot of educators are going to retire at an age before they can start drawing Social Security. So they'll get their pension that, like as Matt said, might be 60%. That's typically not what folks want to live on. And so there's these gap years between when they retire from teaching and start getting their pension and when Social Security kicks in, which will, once Social Security kicks in, they'll be close to, maybe 100% of their pre-retirement income. But those gap years are something they need to plan for, and that's where the 403B or their IRA really comes into. And if they plan well in advance, then they easily can fill those gap years. And then when Social Security kicks in, it's all gravy.
That is such a good point. I mean, let's say you're trying to retire at maybe 55, which you've got 7 years minimum till you hit 62, which is the first year you could take Social Security, and you really shouldn't take it at 62 if you can avoid it, because you take about a 24% hit. So there's potentially, depending on what your age is, you could have a gap of 10 to 12 years, and if you're waiting to take it at age 70, up to 15 years. I mean, what a great opportunity to fill that gap with a 403B or a 457. That's really what it's there for. That's the reason it's there. So that sounds like a major theme of this book, and one that I'm really glad you pointed out, because there is such a difference in planning for a state that has Social Security versus a state that doesn't. You really have to think in a different paradigm. So that's a very big difference. Thanks for pointing that out. What was surprising about Iowa's pension plan and their supplemental retirement plan offerings, the RIC?
Well, I think the first, as Matt mentioned, their formula, every state's formula is different, but their formula is you get a 2% multiplier for your first 30 years of service, and then 1% for the next 5. So that's a little unique right there, that breakdown. But then it also maxes out at 65%. So if you teach more than 35 years, you do not earn any more towards that. I mean, you're still obviously getting paid. That'll increase your final average salary. And you're getting benefits and that kind of stuff. And that is by design. It's again, each pension is designed for their unique circumstances. And because they're anticipating Social Security, which depends on your income, but roughly 35 to 40% replacement income percentage. So they figured 65% is all we need. And so that was a little bit different. The second thing is a little bit more in the weeds, but that I thought of is that IPERS members can purchase service credit like you can in a lot of different states, but in IPERS, you can only purchase service credit at the time you retire. Whereas in the other systems I looked at before, you can purchase it either anytime or certainly anytime after you're vested. Whereas with IPERS, it's at the time of retirement, then you can decide to purchase service credit to increase your benefit, but not before that. So that again affects planning a little bit differently.
You really got to plan ahead for that, because that can be a lot of money.
Yeah, if you choose to do that.
Matt, is there a sweet spot here? I mean, is there a target that people should be looking at? Like, where is the right? Like, if they could hit it just right, where? Because it's a little different. Like here in California, you can just work as long as you want and get like 110% of your pay. And like, what's the sweet spot here?
Yeah, I think in general, there's two things that kind of play out in that sweet spot. One is when a public employee realizes the 65%, I don't know what you want to call it, topping out limit. Yeah, like realizing that I'm kind of to a certain extent, I might be paying myself, or it might not be helpful to teach another year or two. Right. And then the Social Security and health insurance and things like that play out. So this is a general rule, not a general rule, a general scenario that can play itself out in K-12 public schools in Iowa. By the way that school funding and finance plays itself out, there's a different funding bucket that school boards can utilize to pay out employees for early retirement that doesn't come out of the general fund. And so school boards will say, you know what, we're going to offer early retirement for up to 10 employees this year because it comes out of this fund over here. And the idea of if a teacher's making $60,000, we'll pay them a little bit of money for a while and then hire a newbie out of college to make $35,000 a year. Right. And that helps their overall general fund. And so if teachers, administrators sometimes can benefit from this, they're like, you know what, I can take that early retirement incentive for the next couple of years, and that can help me do one of two things. One is it can help me figure out how to bridge the gap between the 65% and the 100% I'm targeting for my living the good life, if you will, until I hit Social Security. And or if I don't have a spouse that's also working and I have to think about health insurance, sometimes that money is specifically tied to, we're giving you the amount of money for 5 years, and you can stay on our health insurance, and that money can just be used to pay for your health insurance. And so it's kind of like we're paying for your health insurance so you don't get out of here and retire early, is how it tends to play itself out. And some schools are very explicit about that. Like, here's why we're giving you this amount of money. So educators ought to be having their ears open and their eyes open to the emails that talk about early retirement incentives. Set up a consultation with IPERS, and then think about how the 403B and the early retirement and IPERS all might play together to actually be beneficial, rather than just teaching another couple of years.
Scott, again, as we have these conversations, it just becomes so apparent how important this book is. I really think it's going to get in the hands of so many Iowa teachers, and what a difference it's going to make because of these different things you need to know. Again, gentlemen, you have found a fantastic niche. This is, oh gosh, I'm excited for the Iowa teachers out there who get to have this resource. Plus, they have this great structure, state-run structure. So it really is the best of all worlds. Matt, is there anything else you would like our audience to know about this book or Iowa plans in general?
Just in general, we talk a lot about Iowa educators, and that's really who we wrote this book for. But I just had two conversations. One was with a cousin recently who works at a community college, a public community college here in Iowa. She's like, "Hey, Matt, I downloaded your book." I was like, "Whoa, like you're in IPERS too." And I was talking with a friend of mine who works for a public, a municipality-run hospital. He's like, "Hey, I'm an IPERS member as well." And so even though we really had teachers in mind, IPERS is far-reaching here. And so I would encourage an Iowa educator who's reading this book to maybe also just talk with some of their friends and family who maybe are also IPERS members to kind of commiserate a little bit and figure out how to make this work for them. And because the 403B world and IPERS are just so tightly connected here in Iowa. And as we've just been a broken record today, look at your 403B plan, right? Like there's plenty of ways as 403B wise can help us realize, this book can realize that we can maximize our long-term financial well-being just by making a few key moves. And I think we're fortunate in Iowa to have a great public employee retirement system and a pretty good retirement investors club of Iowa that can make it possible for us to very clearly see what fees and benefits that we have. And of course, too long didn't read, check out the book and it'll help you get started in the right direction too.
Well, I know we weren't going to talk about this, but it's also your 529 plan, right? That's very well regarded. It's
Yes.
Vanguard funds. Do you want to say anything about that, Matt?
Yeah, same thing, right? Like anyone's going to the Iowa State Fair soon. It's a big deal here in Iowa. Like the College Savings 529, like they're advertising around the state fair. It's so simple. There's a couple different choices, low fees. I've got 4 kids and we've got, money contributing there for all 4 kids. It's super awesome, super easy. There's an app now, like in 2021, there's an app. You go on there and check it out. It's as simple gets out. And for us here in Iowa, there is a Iowa income tax benefit that we talk about in the book, and that's easily Googleable as well. And so it's a wonderful thing. The stock market has been very helpful for my kids' future college tuition and books.
Well, great. Karl, you have found the right person. Let me tell you, to collaborate with here. Karl, is there anything else you'd like to add for things that you'd like the audience to know about your book or anything else in general?
I think I'd like them to know that they can really do this. It just takes a little bit of learning. And like we said, maybe an hour or two with this book, maybe a little bit more after that. But that it's not, you don't have to be a CPA or a Wall Street analyst or anything to do this. And in fact, in some respects, those things might get in your way because you do end up making it more complicated. But that they can make significant changes in their financial lives, which then, and the point of that is not just to make a change in your financial life, it then translates into a significant change in the rest of your life. And again, as we've mentioned multiple times, to kind of live the good life. And then specifically for educators, teaching is hard, right? Teaching is really, really hard, even in the best of circumstances. And teaching through a pandemic is definitely not the best of circumstances. So I think one of our hopes is that this will help folks make better financial decisions, which will then improve their lives, which will then relieve some stress from those folks, which then translates into them being an even better teacher than they were before and helping their students in this really challenging time.
We just recorded a podcast with a middle school principal that will drop, I think tomorrow. So what month are we in? We're in August. And he said basically the exact same thing. If my teachers have financial literacy, if they're taking care of themselves, both mentally, physically, and financially, they're going to have less stress in their lives. They're going to be better teachers, going to be better humans. And so that's 2 podcasts in a row. We've heard that same theme. And I think it makes so much sense. I think it's one area that is a huge missed opportunity for school districts. I think they can get better productivity, have happier teachers if they actually paid attention to this and didn't just say, oh, well, the state takes care of that. No, you have a role to play, and it's not going to be just good for your employees. It's going to end up trickling down to your students. This is a real trickle down economic. All right, Karl, where can someone get this book?
This is available at Amazon.com. I believe you guys in the show notes are going to link to the book and the webpage that goes along with the book, and some other things as well.
Now, there are other states in the hopper, but there are still states that we do not have a local author. So what if someone wants to collaborate with you? How should they go about doing that?
So again, I believe you're going to put a link to a Google form in the show notes that they can just click and fill out. It's really easy. Also can just reach out to me via email or via Twitter or Facebook or however you want. And then we just have a conversation so you get an idea of what this project is about, and if you're interested, and then we go from there.
All right. Well, I'm going to read the various sort of states that you're working on and where we are with this. Arizona, discussion stage. Colorado, completed. Illinois, completed. Iowa, completed. Maine, in progress and coming soon. Nebraska, in progress. New Jersey, discussion stage. Scott, I got more to read, but I'm kind of blown away by how this is just taking off. Iowa, excuse me, Ohio, discussion stage. Or Scott, Oregon. Are you working on the Oregon one, Scott?
No, I know very little about it.
Oregon, discussion stage. I love teasing Scott about his love for Oregon. It's a great state. It's just, I have a good time doing that. Pennsylvania, discussion stage. Virginia, discussion stage. Washington, discussion stage. Wyoming, completed. Karl, this is amazing. I see behind you. Are those the books on your bookshelf?
Those are the books. So last time, because we did video and you posted it, I decided I needed to up my background game. And so my wife helped me make a little display, because that's apparently what I'm supposed to do.
I love it. Well, you might have to up your bookshelf game if you keep publishing more and more
I was
books.
thinking I'm going to need a bigger bookshelf.
Makes me think of Jaws, right? I think we're going to need a bigger boat.
Yes.
Well, I would also say we're going to post, we'll link to our first interview with Karl, which was episode 158. And then the Illinois interview was 175. And Karl is a poster on the 403BY's Facebook group. So if you have further questions about this, come to that group. I don't know, Matt, if you're a member. If not, we'd love to. Oh, you are? Great. This is fantastic. Yeah, this will be good. We will post this, of course, we'll make a notification on the Facebook group, and then hopefully we start getting some questions around that. But gentlemen, just really so happy to see what you've done. Matt, just a pleasure getting to know you. I hope we can stay in touch.
Yeah.
My son and I love biking, and I have this sort of idea that someday I want to do that across Iowa bike ride, which I just think, yeah. Tell me real quick, give a little bit of info about this, because I think it's so amazing.
Yeah, RAGBRAI stands for the Register, which is the Des Moines newspaper, Des Moines Register. Register's annual Great Bicycle Ride Across Iowa. It's thousands of people. They start on one side of the state and go all the way to the other side of the state. It takes about a week. They release the route, a number of months ahead of time. And so all of these cities and towns get ready. All their civic organizations have the popcorn stands and the water bottle hand. It's just an economic boom. And it's also a tourist attraction. It's a wonderful thing for everybody, unless it's super hot, which happens in Iowa, and then it's not so good for a few people every year. But other than that, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that thousands of Iowans look forward to every year. And just a bicycle ride across Iowa, eating apple pie, sampling Dutch letters in Pella, Iowa. I mean, it's just a fantastic thing.
I'm in, and I love what it's not just for the Uber athlete. I see families, I see kids on tricycles. I mean, and you don't have to do the whole route. And it kind of almost reminds me a little bit of the Tour de France, where whatever town the tour is in becomes just one big party. And I think that is super appealing.
It's a huge deal in Iowa, and it keeps getting bigger. That's for sure.
Oh, I love it. Well, we will definitely get a hold of you if I venture to do that. Go ahead, Scott.
You can cut this out if you want, Dan, but I I keep hearing these things about the potential for an actual professional baseball game at the original Field of Dreams field
Yeah.
in Iowa, which sounds like great for Iowa, but like, is this happening?
I think it might be tonight. It might
Wow.
be tonight.
Oh my gosh. How do I not
Yeah.
know about this until today? This is just one of my favorite movies of all time. It's Field of Dreams. I grew up loving baseball, playing baseball. This movie meant so much. The books were amazing. And like, you're the second guest we've had on from Iowa. And like, I just, this is so cool. Okay. Well,
Yankees and White Sox. Yankees and
Wow.
White Sox Field of Dreams.
Wow.
They built a separate, like, as you can imagine, the real Field of Dreams that's there. I visited it. It's not capable to have, however many people.
sure.
But so they built another field, or another baseball field adjacent to it. You might have to walk to the cornfield to get there. I don't know, but it is a sight to see the Field of Dreams, and this is only going to make it that much bigger, better, more awesome. The big deal is like, how do you get tickets? I don't know how people are getting tickets, but it's going to be on TV. It's going to be a big deal.
Okay. I
If
gotta
you
find
build
out
it,
what
if you
time.
build
If
it,
you
they
build
will
it, they will
come.
come.
You got it.
Hey, and then for our book, if you read it, you will learn.
If you write it, they will come. This is great. I love how. Okay, good ending. You don't have to cut this out now, Dan.
No, I think it's a brilliant addition, Scott. Thank you for that. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for what you've done. This is quite the service. And Karl, we can't wait to keep interviewing you.
We'll see.
Matt, great having you on, man. Let's stay in
Yeah.
touch. You are a wonderful spokesman for Iowa.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.